The Big Ten championship is our big story today. Boilers and Wolverines, first time these two have met in 5 years. And interestingly, that is the only time they've met in the last 10 seasons. This is the least played matchup in the Big Ten in that time. Purdue in this game for the first time ever. Michigan looking to get back-to-back titles. And certainly everyone aware of Purdue's track record as a giant killer under Jeff Brom. So, Jerry, let's break this one down. Let's start when Michigan has the ball. So Michigan on offense, these suddenly explosive Wolverines going up against that Boilermakers defense.
Well, they're balanced. Now, they're not always balanced by half. Last week, it was 10 yards the first half rushing and over 200 the second half. Okay, but I think this is pretty straightforward, right? This is a really talented offense Michigan has, and they really are balanced. They have proven they can do both. Purdue's a man coverage team. I would call them multiple. I would say that they're going to do what most teams do to stop an attack like Michigan. They're going to add somebody to the box. That would be the first thing they're going to do. But they're going to always have a free safety. We saw what happened with Ohio State when you don't have a free safety in the middle of the field. That didn't work too much for Ohio State. It certainly won't work for Purdue. So there's be a free safety in the middle. Then you can move the front because this offensive line for Michigan is big, physical, probably one of the best in the country. They won the Joe Moore Award last year. I think they won the finalists this year. So you want to move the front a little bit. What you don't want to do is bring the linebackers on the snap because you lose backside pursuit. So I would think that Purdue will be fairly conservative on defense to try to slow down the Michigan attack. JJ, a lot of wide open receivers last week. I'd say if you wanted to say that Michigan could come along in one part of their offense, I still think it's the deep ball, even though he was tremendous last week because there were wide open receivers. And obviously, if Purdue plays the same kind of back end that Ohio State does, they'll have no chance. So it's pretty traditional. Add an extra guy and hope you can hold up against the pass.
Purdue's given up 9 plays of 50 yards or longer. That is the most in the Big Ten. And it's interesting because I think a week ago we would have said, well, that's not that big a deal. But now all of a sudden we've seen this explosion from Michigan. Do you feel that was more of a byproduct of something being different with Michigan, or was it just a function of the way that Ohio State played them?
I think it's both. To say it was Ohio State not playing well, I don't think that's fair to Michigan. And I don't think it's accurate. Because JJ has had receivers open. Maybe not that wide open, but he's missed receivers. Every quarterback's missed receivers that are open. So I think Michigan's gotten better. When you watch JJ play in this game, in Urban Analysis, we're talking about both quarterbacks. I mean, he just was extraordinary. I mean, his toughness. I mean, that first touchdown pass that he throws, I mean, he is leaning back, and he gets hit in the face. Incredible toughness, the run in the goal line when he scores. So to say that it was just Ohio State's problems on defense, I don't think is accurate. I think it's a mix.
All right, so that's the story when Michigan has the ball. What about Purdue when they have the ball? This is clearly their strong suit, and this is why Purdue is here. The defense is fine. It's kind of a run-of-the-mill, average Big Ten defense, although it's the best defense they've had by some measures in 15-plus years at Absolutely. Purdue. That being said, it's not what got them here. What got them here is their offense. They added the run element this year with Devin Maccabee. They have a great quarterback in Aiden O'Connell and a really good receiver in Charlie Jones. How well-equipped is Michigan to stop them?
Interesting, it's the first West team that's thrown the ball a lot, right? I mean, normally we're talking about the run game of all the West Division teams against Ohio State or Michigan.
The ones in the championship game, you're saying.
Yeah, in the championship game. And so I think possession passes, I think Aiden's going to have to get rid of the ball quickly. They're going to be short routes. They've got to protect him. But the other thing, and you mentioned the run game, they're not going to outrush their opponent in this case. They've done that rarely in Jeff Brom's time there. But if you look at the numbers, when they get close to 100 yards, if you don't count sacks, if you don't deduct the sacks from rushing, they usually win the game because they're always going to pass it. I think Jeff Brom will start slow. I don't think he's going to put a lot on Aiden O'Connell right away. I think he's going to let him get his feet wet, let the run game try it out, even if he's 2nd and 10 and it doesn't look pretty early. I don't think we're going to see a lot of explosions early. I think this Purdue team, first time they've ever in this game. Michigan's been there before. So psychologically, I think Purdue will try to start slow, but then at some point they're just going to have to do whatever they can in the pass game to win a game.
Interesting. And it's funny, I remember very vividly talking to Jeff Brom on our visit there and asking him about the run game. And essentially what he said is, look, they were last in the nation in yards per carry last year. So there's no one who did it less effectively than they did. And he said, we don't have to become a team that is among the best rushing teams in the Big Ten or certainly in the country. We just have to make you defend it. And they have certainly made teams defend it this year. In your mind, is that the biggest difference with Purdue? Like, how did they go from a good team, a team that won a really exciting bowl game a year ago, to one that's now playing for a Big Ten championship?
Yeah, I think that's a major difference. And again, it's more about 1st and 10 than anything else, right? If you're 2nd and 10 and you're playing a team like Michigan's defense, and those guys get all their weight on their front hand and they rush with 4, it's just impossible to really sustain pass protection if you're not going to threaten the defense. So when I say 100 yards, it still might be 2nd and 7, maybe 2nd and 8 once in a while, and then it might be 2nd and 5. They just have to stop the defensive line from just not even thinking about the run. That's how much they have to run. And in past years, there's been times when you could play Purdue and not even think about the run.
It's interesting because obviously your background, as people probably know, is as an offensive coordinator. And in the years that we've been working together, which have been many, I've heard you talk a lot about 1st and 10. I think fans think a lot more about 3rd downs than we think about 1st downs. But it's pretty obvious from being around you that the game is 1st down, right?
There's usually 24 of them. There's usually 24 1st downs in a game. There might be 2 or 3 short yardage plays. There might be 7 to 9 long yardage plays. It is 1st and 10, especially if you're a passing team. You just can't get into the 2nd and 10 mode. And so, the running teams, they want to throw it a little bit more on 1st down. But then if it's incomplete, then they're 2nd and 10. So the one advantage that a running team gives up when they throw it too much is the 2nd down play.
How big an advantage do you think the been there, done that part of this is for Michigan versus Purdue, playing for a spot in the Rose Bowl? I mean, there's immense pressure on these guys. There's a ton at stake for them. I would argue, I think no matter what happens with Michigan, they're going to the CFP. Does that favor Michigan at all, kind of that the pressure's off them, or would you worry about complacency?
I wouldn't worry about Michigan thinking that even if they lose, they go to the college football playoff. I do think coming off of last week's game, Ohio State or Michigan, whoever won that Ohio State-Michigan game, it's 2 weeks in a row to get ready and that to get emotionally. So I wouldn't expect this Michigan team to be sky high, but they were last year. I mean, that was an emotional sideline last year when they played Iowa. I do. And I would, if I was Purdue, worry about everybody going, wow. I mean, it's an extraordinary event, right? I mean, it's totally cool. It's usually half and half, right? I mean, one of the best things about these championship games around the country is hopefully the stadium's split in half. And that's totally cool because, the fans get into it and they go back and forth. It's a great facility. And like you say, I mean, they go to the Rose Bowl. I mean, my goodness, that's something.
No doubt, pretty big stakes. We do have some news breaking this morning regarding one of the Wolverines' stars. A felony weapons charge was filed yesterday against Michigan defensive lineman Mazi Smith. This according to multiple media outlets. The charges stem from an incident on October 7th. No details as to exactly what went down or why it took so long for the charges to be filed. Smith has played in every game this year for Michigan. No comment yet from the school on the charge or his status going forward. Things stand heading into championship weekend. Georgia #1 in the CFP. There had been some question as to whether Michigan might jump them, but the Wolverines are 2nd, TCU 3rd, USC now up to 4. The all-important 5th spot goes to Ohio State. So in theory, were someone to drop out of the top 4, it is the Bucks who would replace them for that final spot. Fox Sports lead game analyst Joel Klatt joins us now, getting set to call the Big Ten championship game Saturday night on Fox between Michigan and Purdue. Get into that in just a bit. But Joel, let's start with the CFP. Let me put it to you this way. Which of those 4 teams do you believe could lose this weekend and still play in the CFP?
I actually think there's a lot of them. I think all of the top three, Rev, would stay in or should stay in the playoff position, even with a loss. I think that's kind of understandable for Georgia and Michigan, and a lot of people would agree with that. I mean, for instance, what are you going to debate, like Michigan and Ohio State, right? Like that's not a debate, right? So that one's pretty clear. I think Georgia is also pretty clear with the win over Tennessee and the fact that they're the best team in college football over the last 31 games. They're the defending national champions. So then the question becomes like TCU. Would TCU win an argument over Ohio State? And I actually think that they would. Remember, in the event TCU loses, as long as it's not 48-0 or something like that, just a normal loss, let's say, to Kansas State. Well, that means Kansas State would likely at least move up a spot or maybe two and be securely inside the top 10. Well, that means that your loss is not only to a top 10 team, but they also beat that Kansas State team, which means that their resume actually gets a little bit better in terms of their best win, right? So then all of a sudden the Kansas State win and the Penn State win for Ohio State are basically even, although Ohio State's happened on the road. And then you have to ask yourself, are we really going to penalize a team for going 12-0 and qualifying for the extra game? So are you going to penalize TCU for having to play the 13th game when Ohio State didn't even get a chance to do that? For those reasons, I think TCU, Michigan, and Georgia are all in regardless of outcome this weekend.
I would agree with you, by the way. I agree on every single bit of your rationale. So I do want to get into the Big Ten championship game with you, but before we do that, I think we need to talk about Ohio State and Michigan. I don't think either one of us is surprised. Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm not surprised that Michigan won the game. They have been a great team all year, gave them every chance in the world to win the game. I'm curious, though, whether you are surprised by the manner in which they won the game, particularly gashing Ohio State for big plays.
Yeah, so yes, to both of the things you just said, and I think that you laid it out perfectly. So, am I surprised Michigan was able to win? No. I mean, Michigan's the second best team in college football, by the way, in the last 26 games. They're 24-2. This is an elite program right now. So, am I shocked that they won? No. I thought in order to win, they were going to have to play a game on their terms. That it was going to have to be a slow, grinded-out style of game, that the offensive line would have to be absolutely dominant for large chunks of the game, that they would have to rush the quarterback really well. And those things, while they maybe ended up happening, it wasn't for the largest portion of the game. In fact, I think that Michigan had 86 yards rushing at about the 7:23 mark of the game. And then those big explosive runs happened with Donovan Edwards at the end of the game and really, pushed their rushing yardage way up. So the surprise is that when Ohio State was for periods dominating and playing on their terms, Michigan hung right with them. And I think that's the biggest addition that J.J. McCarthy brings. You know how long we've sat here and talked? I can't even imagine. I've been talking about it for 2 years. I'm sure you've been talking about it for the same amount of time about is J.J. McCarthy going to raise the ceiling of Michigan's offense, right? I mean, how many times have we had that discussion? And it wasn't really materializing. It was kind of the same Michigan team, the same blueprint. We're going to run the ball. The quarterback's going to protect it, this and that. And then all of a sudden, this guy is the reason that they were able to stay close and actually have a lead when Ohio State was actually dominating portions of that game. So that was the surprising part, and that's the part that Michigan fans have been looking for, in particular from J.J. McCarthy, ever since he signed his letter of intent.
All right, so let's look at it this way now, Joel. To me, and we had this conversation after the game on Saturday, Jerry and Howard and I, and basically reached the conclusion that Michigan now has the upper hand in this rivalry. I don't see how you can spin it any other way. You could look at last year as a blip and say it was weather, whatever you want to say. But now Michigan's beaten them twice, including in Columbus decisively. So Michigan has the upper hand in this rivalry. Why do you believe it has shifted? What has changed here in this rivalry?
Well, a lot. Let me try to boil it down to just a couple of things here so that I don't go too long, which is what I do all the time. First and foremost, Michigan is better at the line of scrimmage. okay? And that goes a long way in this sport, and in particular in this conference. And I think more specifically, they're really good on the interior of their defensive line. And Ohio State has not been great on the interior of their defensive line. The reason I know that is because Michigan didn't have to borrow from their secondary at all to try to stop the run or control the game offensively from the Ohio State perspective. They were able to play split safety, 2 safeties. They were able to play bump coverage. They were able to tackle well on the outside, let those hybrid style players cover when they wanted to, protect them, not play man coverage a lot. Why? Because their defensive tackles are good enough and stout enough to sit in there, provide a little bit of pressure, yes, but they control the run game. Ohio State didn't have that. So what happened? They had to borrow from their secondary to try to stop the run. So they were sold out to stop the run, and that creates risky propositions on the outside where if you miss a tackle, it's a big play. If you miss a coverage, it's a big play. If you're out of your gap by a foot, it's a big play. So Ohio State had to play with fire, but specifically because they have to make up for the fact that their defensive line on the interior is not a good matchup against Michigan's offensive line. So that's number one. Then I would also say, in this long-winded answer, Michigan's just become better everywhere. Okay, Ohio State largely dominated the last 2 decades. But what Ohio State fans totally fail to recognize is that Michigan was way down for large portions of those 2 decades. Rev, from the game 1 versus 2 undefeateds in 2006 to the time that Michigan won last year in 2021, there were 14 seasons of football. Michigan finished unranked in 7 of those seasons. 7. And inside the top 10, 0 times. They finished 10th once, inside the top 10, 0 times. They hadn't finished unranked, 3 times from 06 to when Bo Schembechler got the job. So Michigan wasn't Michigan for those 2 decades. And all of a sudden, Ohio State fans think that it's just a birthright. Well, we're going to dominate them. And the fact remains, Ohio State hasn't slipped. Michigan has just joined them. Okay, I think both of these programs now are an elite level in college football, and it just so happens that you better play great that day in order to get a win, and Michigan has the last 2 years. These are 2 elite programs, and again, Buckeyes haven't necessarily slipped. They've just been joined by Michigan now in the last couple of years.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that you believe that Michigan caught them in terms of personnel. So you're saying you don't think that this is a scheme issue with Ohio State. You think that Michigan's personnel is better?
Yeah, at the line of scrimmage, they're absolutely better. Let's just put it this way: if you put both offensive lines in front of me right now, and you said you have to pick one, I'm taking Michigan's. If you put both defensive lines in front of me right now, interior now, okay, so take the pass rushers out of this, interior, I'm taking Michigan's. Well, that goes a long way in this sport. I know that we love points and throwing the ball on the outside, but it starts and stops at the line of scrimmage. So from a development standpoint, at the line of scrimmage, they've caught them. And I think Jim Harbaugh did a really smart thing over this kind of rebuild arc since COVID, is he realized that he needed to develop that portion of the field because they were never going to go out 5-star Ohio State on the outside. On the outside, Ohio State is better. I would take them any day of the week. But on the interior, it's Michigan. They've developed the interior better than the Buckeyes have.
Well, let's get into the game this weekend. I don't want to sell it short in any way, particularly given Purdue's propensity for pulling massive upsets exactly like this one. In your mind, what would it take for Purdue to have a chance to beat Michigan?
Well, so in every one of these wins that Purdue has against these top 5 teams over the years under Jeff Brom, there is a common thread. And that common thread is that they lean on what they do best, which is throwing the football. And then they lean on a particular wide receiver to be great and borderline unstoppable in those games. If you go back to 2018, that win over Ohio State, you remember Rondell Moore?
Yes.
He went off in that game. I think 170 yards, including that incredible, catch and run, or it might have even been a reverse when he's kind of bouncing off defenders. So he has that performance. Last year against Iowa and Michigan State, David Bell went off. 11 catches in each of those games, well over 200 yards. In the win against Tennessee in the bowl game, by the way, in Nashville, in a difficult environment, I think it was Brock Thompson goes off in that game, over 200 yards. It's always the common thread. So what does it come down to? Really, Rev, Charlie Jones. I think Charlie's going to have to go out there and have a monster game. Now, if it's not Charlie, maybe it's Payne Durham, their tight end, who I think is one of the better tight ends in the league. But one of those guys is going to have to go off in the passing game and really control the game on the outside.
So many great stories on that Purdue team, from Maccabee, the walk-on running back, Charlie Jones, who was briefly a walk-on in his time at Iowa. And then
Aiden was a walk-on,
and then Aiden
right?
O'Connell,
it's so good.
Eighth string quarterback at one point.
And my heart just goes out to Aiden too, Rev. I mean, can you imagine how tough this time has been? He played so well against Indiana to win the old Oaken Bucket, to get him a division championship. My heart breaks for him. I hope he plays well.
Losing his brother unexpectedly, obviously, as people are probably aware here in the last week. What about defensively? How do you think Purdue matches up defensively against Michigan's offense?
You know, Purdue is not as porous as people believe on the defensive side. I'm sure you've looked at this, and the guys have looked at this. They do a pretty good job against the run. What ends up happening, though, is that they'll give up like one long run, and it distorts their statistics. I think the strength of their defense is up front, and they've got a huge task ahead of them. Last week should be a lesson for them. You know, if you try to go in there and just totally shut down Michigan and their run game, they'll eventually get you, because you have to commit too many resources to do that. That's how Ohio State got caught, in particular with those late explosive plays. So if Purdue just forces Michigan to snap the ball 10, 11, 12 times, basically I'm telling you this: if you're Purdue and you're the defense, you'd much rather die a slow death than a quick death, because a slow death actually gives you a chance to keep living. And that would be the MO and the blueprint that I would give them going into this week.
Can't wait to get down there, Joel. We will see you there. Thanks, as always, for everything that you've done for us throughout the year. Looking forward to seeing you in Indy. Our big stat, presented by Gatorade. Wisconsin's volleyball team, the outright Big Ten champs, after winning the national title a year ago. They're riding an 18-match win streak into the NCAA tourney. That is tied for the second longest streak for the Badgers since 2000. Only the 2014 team had a longer one. That gets us to our big interview. It is Wisconsin outside hitter Sarah Franklin, a unanimous first-team All-Big Ten pick. She is joining us now. Sarah, let's start there. 18 in a row. That's pretty good. What's clicking with this team at this point?
You know, one of the big things that we were focusing on this season was just progression throughout the season. And I think we did a really good job at that by the end. And, you know, it's kind of weird to think about, but I wasn't really paying attention to, you know, the win streak or how we were doing. I was just focusing on the next game. And I think that was really important for us, is focusing on the next game, next point, next play. So I think that was really big, as well as the progression throughout the season. So I think we've done a really good job at that.
Sarah, you transferred in from Michigan State. Interesting balancing act there. What is kind of the challenge of fitting in with a new team, but also trying to be an integral part of that team and knowing that you have an important role to play from the get-go?
Well, you know, coming in, I wanted to be challenged at every aspect of the game. Coming to Wisconsin, I think, was the right decision, because everyone on the team is amazing, and, you know, you can't think about it too much, because every single one of the girls on the team want what's best for each other. So everyone gets in the gym, everyone works really hard, and, you know, whoever is out there, and I think everyone solidified that with me really early. So I think it gave me all the confidence in the world, and it was just a really smooth transition coming in with these girls and knowing that they have my back and that I'm going to have their back every step of the way.
Was there an explicit conversation there? Like, did people say, hey, you belong here, don't worry about it? Or was it something that just kind of happened implicitly along the way?
It was just implicit. You know, you come in with these girls, and it was just a click right away, and you can feel the trust on the court the entire time. So I think it was just implied from the start, and I think that was really important and really big coming in.
And of course, you were a great player at Michigan State. You were first team All Big Ten. You got that honor again for the second straight year. What does that mean to you?
You know, it's a great honor to get that, but, you know, I'm just out there to play volleyball, and I don't think too much about, you know, awards or accolades, you know, in the moment. So it's really cool that was able to to have again. But I think, just getting out there and playing really hard is the most important thing.
So you are from Florida. You started as a soccer goalie, even though both of your parents were volleyball players. What ultimately got you to acquiesce and go over to their side and play volleyball?
My mom was kind of pushing me into that, and as soon as I got on the court, I loved it. I loved the diving on the floor and trying to get the ball up and jumping and hitting it, and I just fell in love as soon as I got on the court with one of the camps. So it was definitely my mom that kind of got me into that.
What was the recruiting picture like for you out of high school? Was Wisconsin in the picture at all?
No, so I was recruited mainly by a couple Big Ten schools, and then schools around Florida, because everyone thought Florida girl wants to be around Florida. But I knew I wanted to play in the Big Ten, so just the couple Michigan State, and I think it was Illinois recruited me, and it was just them two, and I loved Michigan State from high school, but when it got to the big things, I knew that it was going to be a little step up having to make that transfer.
Yeah, what's it been like to be in the Big Ten? I mean, I think we get a sense here being in Big Ten country of how powerful this conference is, but tell me about the lure of this league for someone from Florida, for someone who's not from the region, the notion of playing and competing in this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the Big Ten from when I was younger, and I knew it was the best conference out there, and it definitely lived up to what it was said to be, because every single night you cannot take a night off no matter what, and even some of the lower teams are not that. Anyone from this conference can go into any other conference and do really, really well. So it's a battle every night, and I absolutely love it, because you never get a night off, and you're always so focused and dialed in and battling through it with your team.
So, Sarah, you are a civil engineering major. So I need to ask you, what is the one thing that you have built or fixed in your life that you are most proud of?
So I'm actually changing my major.
Okay.
So it's gonna be mathematics. So I do have that little switch, but I did like the whole aspect of engineering, just because that was a part of what my family has done. So I liked it. But with balancing volleyball, I just kind of figured that it's been a little bit much. So I think mathematics is going to be a little bit of a better fit for me.
So math is an easier major?
Well, I enjoy it a little more than I do engineering.
Okay.
So.
All right, so give me a sense of a math class that you're taking. I think, like most of us think, geometry, algebra, maybe calculus if we're really daring and out there. But what do math classes look like for a math major? What would a title of a class be?
So right now I'm in differential equations and linear algebra. So that's just kind of a mix of the two. And it's probably one of my favorite classes right now, just because I can understand and fully work through the problem. So I kind of like it a lot more. And then once you get to the higher math class, it is more about proofs and proving how math actually works.
So what ultimately would you want to do?
With that, I'm not sure yet. So we'll see where I end up. But right after college, I'm planning to go pro and continue volleyball for a while before I get into the job world.
All right. Okay, we'll get back to the volleyball, but I would think you'd have some sort of advantage in figuring out angles or something like that. So we'll have to dive into that at a future time. Let's talk about the tournament. Again, this is the defending national champs. I understand you weren't on the team, but the vast majority of the players were. And so I think it's an interesting challenge for Coach Sheffield. We had him on earlier this year, of kind of how you message that as a head coach. What has he said to this team about entering the tournament after all the success of last year?
Again, I think it's just a focus of, next point, next game, and we just have to worry about being in the present. And I think that's been a big focus towards the end, is just being in the present and being able to focus on what you have next, whatever team it is, whatever point, whatever play. And so I just think that's super important. And, all the girls have been the same with that. And I think it's just been solidified that, we're all in this together, and, whatever support we need, we're going to have. And it's just about moving forward and focusing on what you have right in front of you in the present, because it's all about the journey here. And I think that it's going to be so much fun, but it obviously is going to be, hard. It's going to be grueling, and we're all going to love the journey in that.
Okay, so let's talk about who's next. We'll finish there. Quinnipiac is your first match. What should we know about them, and what do you know about them in terms of the challenge they present?
Yeah, they're going to come out firing. They just won their conference. So I think it's going to be a really fun match, being able to get the tournament started. Everyone's ready for their first matches. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of hard, gritty work there.
All right, well, Sarah, best of luck. Really a pleasure to visit with you, and I hope that we get to see you down the road, maybe do some differential equations together. I think that would be a ton of fun.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, Sarah Franklin, congratulations on a great season thus far.